William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
Conciliation agreements were produced along with the 23 withdrawals of resolution. Each April, the nation celebrates and observes Fair Housing Month. Every Fair Housing Month offers an opportunity to renew the country's commitment to equality in housing. But this year is particularly historic, as HUD and America commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. The theme of the year-long celebration is the Fair Housing Act, 50 years of opening doors, which emphasizes the critical role that the Act has played in giving every person an equal chance to obtain the housing of their choice. The Fair Housing Act prohibits housing discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, handicap, criminal status, and national origin. When President Lyndon Johnson signed the landmark bill into law on April 11, 1968, he said, "Fair housing for all human beings who live in this country, is now a part of the American way of life." HUD Secretary Ben Carson echoed that same sentiment in a recent open letter to ZAC, in which he said, "The ideals of that law and our continuing work to support it are really quite simple. Fair is fair." All discriminatory policies and practices stain the very fabric of our nation, but HUD is especially focused on protecting the right of women to feel safe and secure in their homes, free from unwanted sexual advances or other forms of sexual harassment. No woman should have to put up with unwanted sexual advances in order to keep a roof over her head. HUD recently charged the owner and landlord of several rental properties in Wichita, Kansas, with discrimination for sexually harassing 2 female tenants. In that case, the property manager entered the apartment of one of the women uninvited, sexually harassed her, and requested that she consent to sex in exchange for her being allowed to stay in the unit. And in the coming months, HUD will host a series of training sessions for Public Housing Authority employees, board members, and residents on what actions constitute sexual harassment and what should be done to address it. Another form of discrimination HUD is particularly active in addressing is discrimination against families with children. Since 1988, the Fair Housing Act has prohibited housing discrimination against families with children under the age of 18. This includes refusing to rent to a family that includes 1 or more children, charging different prices, imposing additional fees, or establishing different rules for families with children. Also covered are expectant families, whether it's a pregnant woman or persons in the process of adopting or securing custody of a child. Yet every year, HUD receives more than 800 complaints alleging this form of discrimination, accounting for almost 11% of FHEA's complaint-based work. Last fall, HUD charged the owners and operators of 2 apartment buildings in Altoona, Pennsylvania with violating the Fair Housing Act when they posted an online classified ad which stated that the unit was not suitable for children. In another family status case, HUD charged a group of New Hampshire landlords with discrimination when the on-site manager purposely limited the housing options of rental applicants with young children. In one instance, when the manager learned that an applicant had an infant son, he told her that she could only rent one of the first 40 units, none of which were available at the time. Practices that restrict where a family may live are just as illegal as denying a home to a family because they have children. A family's housing choices shouldn't be limited just because they have kids. Housing is what enables families to feel grounded, to have a sense of security and consistency. So HUD is doing more to expand housing opportunities for families and single mothers with children, including vigorously pursuing enforcement actions. To help support HUD's efforts in that area, the department last month awarded more than $30 million to organizations that conduct intake, testing, and litigation of their housing complaints, including complaints alleging family status discrimination. HUD is also devoting more energy to fighting the discrimination many persons with disabilities continue to face, especially discrimination against persons who require service or assistance animals. Disability is the most common basis of fair housing complaint HUD and its partner agencies receive, accounting for 55% of all complaints, and the number is expected to rise as the nation's population continues to age. For example, last summer, HUD reached an agreement with the owners and managers of 2 apartment communities in Green Bay, California, resolving allegations that they wouldn't allow resident with disabilities to keep their assistance animal. And in Moore, Oklahoma, which is part of our region, HUD charged the landlords of a rental home with this same type of discrimination when they refused to let a veteran with disabilities keep his emotional support animal. The veteran provided medical documentation proving that he needed the animal. The law is clear. Any person living with a disability that requires the use of a service or assistance animal has the right to that reasonable accommodation. However, there are some individuals who game the system by buying phony animal certifications online, sometimes for as little as $25. This is it drains the limited resources that HUD has to deal with real issues. So in the coming months, HUD will be taking this issue on in a coordinated way. HUD will also be continuing its efforts to address discriminatory practices that prevent hard-working families from obtaining the dream of home ownership. Not long ago, the department reached an agreement with a Northern Illinois lender resolving allegations that the lender's business service area excluded majority African American and Hispanic neighborhoods. As part of the settlement, the lender established a $1 million loan program that will increase lending in those areas. In another lending discrimination case, HUD reached an agreement with the California Credit Union resolving allegations that it denied a couple's mortgage loan application because his wife was on maternity leave. No family should have to choose between obtaining the home of their dreams and having children. Neither should the shortage of affordable housing, particularly in high-cost areas, deter the dreams of families trying to create a better life. Last fall, HUD announced an agreement between a group of fair housing advocates in the state of Maryland, resolving a complaint challenging the fairness of the state's low-income housing tax credit program. The agreement calls for the state to increase the number of affordable housing units in Baltimore region by as many as 1,500, with more than 1,000 of those being new construction. And in Houston, HUD recently reached an agreement with the city that will expand choice and mobility for low-income residents who use housing choice vouchers, including those experiencing homelessness and victims of Hurricane Harvey. In addition, the city will develop an objective policy for evaluating applications to build low-income housing tax credits supporting affordable housing. Individuals, particularly low-income individuals, should also have the chance to achieve economic upward mobility. That's why HUD is devoting new energy to its Section 3 program. The program that requires the HUD financial assistance provided to grantees is used to create employment and other opportunities for low and very low-income persons. Each year, more than $950 million in HUD funding provided to grantees is used to award contracts to Section 3 eligible businesses, generating thousands of jobs for low and very low-income individuals. What's more, HUD Section 3 Business Registry, the online database that connects contractors with Section 3 eligible businesses, continues to expand. Currently, more than 3,800 businesses have self-certified as being Section 3 eligible, and that number is expected to increase. Data show that when HUD provides an average of people to get jobs, it helps other families to lift themselves from dependency to self-sufficiency. That's why we're also championing Envision Centers, a new concept HUD where we partner with other groups to provide tools to upward mobility in a one-stop shopping environment. Today's housing challenges are considerable, and there are no easy solutions. But the many initiatives that HUD has underway are helping to remove barriers that keeps some segments of society from taking full advantage of all America has to offer. 50 years after the Fair Housing Act has been born, HUD remains firmly committed to creating a nation where every person has the same access to housing and economic opportunity. Now, I know today we're going to be focused on affordable housing as well, so let me just take a moment to throw out some facts about HUD's footprint in Texas for multifamily and affordable housing. There are currently over 196 FHA properties in Texas that participate in the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, providing 21,000 units of affordable housing. We have over 600 properties in Texas, providing rental assistance through housing assistance payment contracts. And this includes 61 properties in Dallas County alone. And overall, that works out to over 53,500 units of assisted housing statewide. There are also 213 Section 202 and 811 projects in Texas that provide over 7,400 units of housing for seniors and the disabled. As you know, FHA does not originate Section 8 subsidized family housing any longer. Our new properties are developed as market rate through FHA multifamily insurance, which are covered as non-recourse loans. And so they're very attractive investment instruments as well. But many properties in our existing inventory have subsidies attached to assist low-income tenants. So we also have the goal of redirecting or reducing the cost, of doing business with respect to subsidized housing. And I believe that's key, and HUD's primary rental assistance programs, both project-based assistance and housing choice vouchers, share a similar challenge. That is, every year, the cost of doing business goes up. So each year, the President and Congress have to make a choice. Funding goes up, or the number of people we assist goes down. And it's no secret that we're looking for ways to alter that dynamic into something more sustainable. One success is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, where tax credits are provided to bring in equity and bring down costs, and thus rents. Most of you are aware that this is the Department of Treasury program. But its flexibility often couples with a variety of HUD efforts from home to CBG to FHA, and with over 20,000 units of housing provided, it's very successful. Again, that's a program that HUD greatly appreciates, with low-income housing tax credit deals providing affordable housing without necessarily impacting our budget. The Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, also known as RAD, allows housing authorities to leverage both private and public funds to modernize and improve public housing stock. And they do it by partnering with multifamily developers. This program works by bringing in private capital, not by increasing HUD's budget. And you may know that there is a current cap on the program of 225,000 units nationally. This program has encouraged over $4 billion in construction. So we continue to look at RAD as a viable program to address the future of public housing, helping to modernize rental assets and bring private capital, easing taxpayer burdens. Housing authorities and developers that have participated have already preserved some 61,000 units of affordable housing in the program. And our regional administrator, Beth Van Dyne, recently visited one of the largest RAD locations, which is in the city of El Paso. Plus, she's visited facilities in Fort Worth and Dallas, where PHA units are being renovated, updated, or replaced under the program. While we might not all agree on methods, I think the need to preserve affordable housing is unquestionable, and the extension of RAD is contributing to this effort. So, in closing, that's just a little bit about Fair Housing Month. We've got a full day, and just know that HUD's commitment to equal treatment under the law and affordable housing in Texas is here today and in the future. So enjoy the forum, and thank you for allowing me to take some of your time today.
She sits down. We want to present Leslie a very small token of our appreciation for her expertise and her committed effort all these years with HUD. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next on our agenda is one of my favorites. Raquel Favela, who is the Chief of Economic Development and Neighborhood Services for the City of Dallas, has brought fresh energy to some of the intense challenges that we face with creativity. Her own background is 2 decades of experience working with government at the municipal, at the state, and federal levels. Her bio is in your program, and I don't want to have to read all of it to you because she has a lot of accomplishments, and I want to give her the most time to speak and give you her expertise. But I do want you to know that she oversees the Departments of Planning and Urban Design, Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization, Code Compliance, Fair Housing, and Economic Development. Now, bridging those silos, making sure that everyone is working together for the end result for our citizens has been something that she brings strong experience, both as a consultant and an expert in this exact area from her background. Prior to joining the City of Dallas for a decade, she worked in strategic direction for clients' priorities for community development projects. And she's been a trusted advisor to government leaders. She has exceptional knowledge that she brings to the table for us, and it actually made me think of one other quote from Matthew Desmond that kind of bridges exactly what we heard from Mrs. Bradley and what I know that Raquel will touch on, when he said, "We can start with housing, the sturdiest of footholds for economic mobility. A national affordable housing program would be an anti-poverty effort, human capital investment, community improvement plan, and public health initiative, all rolled into one." That's a lot to accomplish, but I have faith that Raquel Favela could do it for us. So let's hear from her. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
No pressure, right, Christine? We're going to solve the fair housing problems by 3:30 this afternoon. It'll all be solved. So thank you for coming this morning. I have had many days when I have talked with TC Broadnax and said, "Well, you invited me to come, and you told me it was going to be a challenge, but you didn't tell me all of the challenges that would be involved in coming to join you in the team." It has almost been exactly a year since I joined the City of Dallas, and I have to tell you that before I came, I had a portfolio of 7 clients that spanned counties like Los Angeles County, states like the state of Illinois, the city of Chicago, small cities like New Braunfels, Texas, Laredo, Texas, the city of San Antonio. So large states, large counties, small cities, or large, medium-sized cities. But the City of Dallas feels like a combination of all 7 of the portfolio of clients that I had, all in one, right? All of the experiences in one. So today, as we pause to celebrate the anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, and the courage that it took to pass this legislation, I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the history within Dallas that has brought along some of that implementation in fair housing. So for those of you that know, the Office of Fair Housing started with a small staff of 3 in its original form, and now it's a staff of 12. Not a very big staff, but I'm always impressed with how much work Beverly and her team are able to accomplish. Beverly, who's right here, I think everybody knows, but would you please stand, and where is the rest of your team? Where's the rest of your team? Where's the rest of the staff? Stand up. Yep. I really want to acknowledge them.
because they investigate every year somewhere between 80 to 100 complaints a year of housing discrimination. And since 2000, their office has facilitated the settlement of well over 220 cases. And so it's a lot of work. And for a staff of 12, they really accomplish a whole lot. I've often challenged Beverly since I joined about how we could be a little bit more entrepreneurial, because we have a lot of multifamily property owners who could use some training, right, on how to be in compliance with fair housing. So in the upcoming months, we will be looking at opportunities to implement some strategies for offering her staff's expertise and services for a nominal fee, right? There's no reason why the city shouldn't charge a fee for offering its expertise for the implementation of those. Yes, I think it's important. I always tell the staff they should see themselves as expert advisors in their respective fields, right? And so they should be experts at it. And they are. Truly, Beverly has a phenomenal team. Anytime that a question comes up regarding fair housing, they do a phenomenal job at responding quickly. So I wanted to acknowledge them because even as we go through the budget process, they actually represent such a small portion of the general fund budget, and even then we get a lot of questions asked about why any general funds are necessary to conduct investigations for an assignment that essentially is a HUD, assignment. And so I have to explain that not all of our work is HUD assigned work, right? That some of the investigations we do have absolutely nothing to do with HUD assignments. So because since the passage of the Act in 1968, the protected classes have been expanded, right, since then. And so I'm reminded that most of the policy changes that occur happen incrementally, right? And so that's the way that I like to look at our housing policy recommendation that we have. Although it is a comprehensive policy because it is an overhaul for a lot of things, it is going to require that we have a committed group of individuals that continue the good work of evaluating opportunities to improve. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the changes that we've already made. So Leslie gave some examples of some fair housing violations throughout an investigations that they've conducted. So I want to tell you about a few that when I joined the city of Dallas, I was surprised that no one had kind of wondered why we were actually implementing this policy. So we actually provided down payment assistance that was higher, and it was an arbitrary number, higher if the buyer was going to buy in a very low income area. So we are in the business of helping very low to moderate income families. And so we were incenting them to buy in low income areas. So that is actually a violation of the Fair Housing Act, right? The city of Dallas had a policy that was in violation of federal law. We were providing a higher amount of down payment assistance to buy in certain areas. That is essentially a way of segregating people to buy and closing housing options in other parts of the city. So very quickly, right, we changed that policy. Number one, there was no arbitrary number. We changed it to underwriting based on, number one, what the market conditions are actually in Dallas, right? How much the houses are actually selling for, how much the buyers actually qualify for, and what kind of assistance our targeted populations, right, at different income bands need in the way of a soft second mortgage to help them access those homes. That opens up the entire city so that they can choose where they want to live and not have to buy where we are telling them they have to go buy, right? So in distressed areas. So that was one policy that changed while Councilmember Atkins was chair of this committee. The other policy that changed quickly was the underwriting policy itself, right? The idea that we need to use federal funds so that we leverage the resources, because as Leslie indicated, when we subsidize something to the degree that we reduce the number of families that get help, the net effect is less people get helped on an annual basis. And so producing 40 units a year is not going to help if the need is in the hundreds of thousands in the city of Dallas, right? So we need to figure out ways in which we can leverage those federal funds, those federal resources. And so by changing those requirements to comply with federal law, right, which says that we have to have a cost reasonableness. So again, that was another practice in Dallas that was not in compliance with federal law. We are now leveraging so that the net effect will be the creation of additional units. So instead of providing all city funding for the housing development, now we should be providing somewhere between the 30% of the funding instead of the 70 to 100% of the funding. So that means in the end, more housing units should get produced, right? And that's the goal, right? More units on the ground to help more people on an annual basis. So those are systemic issues that affect housing choice opportunities. One of the other policy recommendations, also that in our existing, I'm sure a lot of you are aware, that ignored the market conditions is the number of high rental units in the city of Dallas. And so you've heard a lot of folks comment about how the best way to address the affordable housing shortage is to protect the affordable housing you do have. And so by implementing a rental housing rehab program, you're basically creating an incentive for landlords to make improvements to properties so that they remain affordable and they don't allow them to deteriorate. So we want to protect the housing stock that is affordable and make sure that all of those improvements are made. We want to make sure that people who live in rental property that provides affordable housing is not just safe, decent, and affordable to them, but that it also meets the market criteria, right? That it's not substandard to the market. Everyone should want to live in that product, not have to live in that product. And that's what this housing policy encourages, right? That there's dignity in living in that housing development that is subsidized by anything the city, any of the city tools, CDBG, home, or even tax increment finance, right? That's one of the biggest changes in the housing policy, is that we're saying we want to build housing that is of market standard and then figure out the incentives to help people access that housing. That represents a big shift in the housing, in the way that housing has been developed in Dallas. So rather than building to what markets can afford, we're building to the market and then layering the affordability to help people at the different income bands access it. So we realize that there are a lot of issues that can't be addressed immediately, right? As Leslie indicated, housing is one of the issues. We live in a community and a region that possesses great wealth and opportunity, but we also know that our vulnerable populations do not always share in that prosperity. So what the policy seeks to do is bridge that gap and develop a strategy to get that prosperity to all of the communities over a period of time. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge in Dallas, is everybody wants to know how much time. And so what I offer is that the time that it has taken to sort of get to the level of disinvestment in Dallas is a lot longer than it would take to recover from the disinvestment, because Dallas has such a strong market. It is growing at an enormous pace. The fact that Dallas grew at such a pace that there is a housing shortage tells us there's a lot of opportunity for growth and development. So the challenge here is not whether or not there's time for us to implement this and see the growth. The challenge here is to figure out whether or not we're going to be committed to a strategy long enough to see it permeate and affect the market. There are things that we address in this housing policy that very few people have noticed, and mostly brings us into compliance with things that we've ignored for a long, long time. There's a component in there about universal design. We've built housing, sometimes for seniors, that has no accessibility. So the universal design guidelines layer a minimum requirement for the development of housing so that people are able to age in place. They have minimum requirements so that, over time, families don't have to move out and find ADA accessible units or have to make costly modifications. The units should be built so that ramps are easily, there's at least one no entry doorway, so that there's entry doorways that are wide enough to accommodate a wheelchair and a walker, so that the master bedroom has ramps or, handlebars, grab bars in the restrooms, or the ability to add them to them when they're ready to add them. So they're blocked for that. These are basic requirements in any federally assisted, and they haven't been in place. Leslie mentioned Section 3. The City of Dallas hasn't had a Section 3 policy. This housing policy incorporates Section 3. It provides for the Section 3 incentives for jobs for very low income. So it allows for the creation of jobs for any federally assisted development. Environmental reviews and lead-based paint hazard controls. We didn't have a policy for those things. Basic, again, transparent underwriting guidelines that show and demonstrate to the general public that the city has a process for ensuring that we are subsidizing projects in a reasonable manner, that we show some cost reasonableness, that there's a review process, a competitive process that's transparent to the general public, that it'll be published through a notice of funding availability or a request for applications. We published the scoring criteria for the location of low-income housing tax credits, and it tracks the proximity, for example, to public transportation, the proximity to grocery stores, full-service grocery stores, not make-believe grocery stores. The proximity to schools based on the rating of the schools. So there's a full scoring criteria that is incorporated into that, so that we can't just call an area a redeveloping area. We have to demonstrate that it is a redeveloping area. And that will be part of the scoring process. We have to demonstrate, or the applicant has to demonstrate that they have the expertise and property management experience. We get a lot of emails from residents who live in subsidized housing complaining about the condition of the subsidized housing. And so we have to deploy both code enforcement and our police department to those properties to find out, and then sometimes Beverly staff to find out what some of the compliance issues are. So the housing policy seeks to provide a fair access to housing. And then in the case of for-sale housing, what it seeks to do is really break generational poverty cycles. Again, by providing access to markets that otherwise and prior to this had not been given access to. So we're encouraging development in what are called middle markets or tipping markets. So last year we went through this process of doing this market value analysis where we assessed all of the residential real estate throughout the city. And we identified basically 9 categories. Top 3 categories, A, B, and C markets, are the top markets in Dallas where based on median sales, vacancy rates, and 10 other different factors, they rate the markets. A, B, and C's are the top markets. D, E's, and F's are the middle markets or tipping markets. And then G, H, and I's are the most stressed markets. So by identifying these markets, we identified where the middle markets are, and we're recommending that we give access and priority to those middle markets to build housing there so that we can give access to those middle markets. In those middle markets, we're suggesting that families even at the 60% of AMI, as low as 60% of AMI, can access that housing. We've given ourselves specific production target goals for that, so that this is not a plan that's just a pie in the sky. We have specific production goals so that if we exceed them, that's wonderful. But we're setting a minimum threshold for production and for accessibility to each of the income bands. My goal is, of course, that we blow those numbers out of the water and that we, in the next year when we're evaluating, we can say, we actually can produce more, or we can actually help more families, right? One is the unit production, the other is how many families get helped, right? So our goal is, of course, to help more families, but we have to start with some reasonable goals based on what we think we've been able to produce previously and what we think we have access to. One of the biggest challenges we have is that in increasing the access to those home ownership opportunities in those middle markets is that instead of driving a lot of the subsidies to developers, right, the delta between what it costs to build there and what houses sell for in those areas, that's not as deep. My goal is that the subsidy instead goes more towards the buyers. Right? Those are where the subsidies get directed. But that is costly, right? It's a soft second mortgage that is very deep. To help a family at 60% of AMI afford a home in that middle market is a very deep subsidy. But that is a very good public investment because that is the way to break generational poverty. All of the goals of the Fair Housing Act to help people access good education, to access good amenities and break those poverty cycles. That happens when we provide access to areas that they have otherwise been redlined from. So in order to accomplish those things, we're going to have to be very aggressive in raising private philanthropic dollars into a housing trust fund. And it'll be a challenge for the entire city, right? Because it's never had a housing trust fund in the past. And so there's a lot of speculation as to whether the philanthropic community will step up to do that. I believe they will, especially if we have a plan in place. We've never had a plan in place, but the feedback I've received from the financial institutions from the philanthropic side of their organization is that they've been waiting for a plan. They've been waiting for a strategy. And if we have that, I think they would step up to the plate. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity in this housing policy for improvement. And I think there's one area in the policy recommendation is you're probably asking yourself, well, how do we help? in advancing fair housing. And I would say the Housing Policy Task Force is one recommendation where I think everyone can stay involved. One recommendation, the reason we made that recommendation was there was a lot of feedback in our housing policy town halls that people wanted to stay engaged. I was personally exhausted after the 8 policy town halls, but I actually was surprised to hear from some of the participants that they were sorry it was done, that it was over. They wanted to continue to have conversations about housing. And so the Housing Policy Task Force recommendation to the committee came from that. Also, every year, as Leslie indicated, the LIHTC program, the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, is one of the major tools for increasing affordable housing. Well, every year the state issues a qualified allocation plan for how they're going to distribute those tax credits. The city, collectively, I don't mean the organization, we ought to be participating in the public input process for the qualified allocation plan based on our collective, in the region, for our collective opinions and priorities for how those tax credits get prioritized, right? And we haven't been participating in those discussions in many, many years. And so consequently, I can speak for Dallas. This was the first time that Dallas actually participated in the 9% tax credit cycle in at least 3 years. And so it is imperative that we stay engaged and have these discussions so that we know how the state will prioritize those credits. And connect with some of these other programs. There are a lot of organizations that have now indicated they want to be contractors for the city in our rehab programs, home repair programs, whether they're for the rental or the home ownership, owner-occupied programs. So I think that the engagement is very much appreciated, not just within the city of Dallas, but in the region. And so to that, I would like to actually recognize, and I was waiting till more people arrived because I wanted to thank the regional partners for participating in the North Texas Assessment of Fair Housing. And so I'd like to ask for any of the participating jurisdictions to stand up if you are in the room. And is there a representative from UT Arlington here? There we go. Thank you very much. Stand up. Thank you very much. This has been quite the year. Now everybody knows in the room that we had some hiccups along the way. But we've overcome, the challenge with the data and the change and and here we are. Our goal is June, right? We will have a new plan. And there are more challenges ahead. I'm going to venture to say that with Leslie's history, 29 years of advocating for fair housing, I won't put her on the spot, but I would venture to say that we continue to have her support in the implementation of fair housing. And I think for that reason and for the discussion at the national level, we should all stay involved and engaged. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.
So she says we can't solve everything by 3:30, but the collective brain power and the passion and the expertise that this panel brings is getting us a lot closer, I think. As a citizen, I'm inspired to see the market value analysis, the affordable fair housing research that's been done, because I do feel there's a strategy in place. So we have a short break, and then you'll return, I know, to experience a fantastic panel. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
We want to thank all of our speakers and Christine, who serves as our mistress of ceremonies this morning. They've all done an outstanding job, so let's give them a hand. of appreciation to present. First to Christine for doing an outstanding job. Thank you, Christine. And the next one is for the chair of our Economic Development and Housing Committee, Councilmember Tadale Atkins. And Leslie, we're going to ask you to come forward and accept this on behalf of Ms. Dunn. You did an outstanding job, and we'll let her know that you gave an outstanding speech, and we appreciate you sharing the day with us.
Thank you very much.
And last but certainly not least, my boss, Raquel Fable, I'm going to ask her to come up. We have thank you for your support in allowing us to do this today, and all the encouragement and all of the dynamic change that you bring to the city. We appreciate you very much. So at this time, let me just give you a few instructions before we go on break. As was mentioned before, the restrooms are downstairs. We still have some coffee and refreshments upstairs. There's also an exhibit on Martin Luther King upstairs. So during the time that we're taking this break, if you'd like to go up there and look at that exhibit, this is a very interesting building. There are other things to look at upstairs. We're going to ask you to come back in about 15 minutes. We're going to set up for the panels, and when you come back, we're going to have a very interesting discussion on affordable housing. Okay, so let's just mention that the men's restroom is upstairs. Okay? So, thank you, and we'll see you back in about 15 minutes.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.